Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review of Receiver of Many by Rachel Alexander. This is the first book in an adult Hades and Persephone retelling duology, and this is very, very adult. In fact, this is erotica, which I didn't know before going into it. So I've heard amazing things about this book over the years. This was originally published on Wattpad and then was turned into a published work. So I've heard amazing things. This is like the best Hades Persephone retelling that has all the elements that I would like in a Hades Persephone retelling. I will link a video where I talked about Hades Persephone up above, so you gotta get a sense of what I look for in retellings. So I was really looking forward to it. Granted, no one mentioned ever when they were talking to me that this was erotica. I saw in the synopsis at the very, very last line, which who even really gets the last line of synopsis is, because I knew I was going to read it anyway, that it does say erotic story. It doesn't say erotica though. And I have a little gripe with that because it's like erotic stories and erotica can be different. You know, like there's overlap there obviously, but something can be erotic without being erotica, in my opinion. So, I'm prefacing this whole review with the fact that this is erotica. This has a lot of sex scenes, explicit sex scenes from the beginning. Sexuality is like a huge thing the entire way through. It's in your face. If that's something that you're not going to be into and you can't look past, maybe not read this one. But otherwise, I have more things to talk about besides the erotica, although that's going to be a major point of this, because I went into it surprised that it was erotica, and that kind of threw me off a little bit. So first off, I'm going to talk about the world building. So like I said, this is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and this is a traditional Hades and Persephone retelling in that the characters are Hades and Persephone. The gods do exist. Everything is more traditional, I would say, and so that is the element that I was kind of looking for. I want a actual, like, Hades Persephone, this is them retelling. It's one of the things I've been looking for a long time. It's like my holy grail. So this had all of that, which was really great. So you have all of the pantheon being explored as characters and really just as, like, figures, which is part of the world building. I really liked the setting, especially of the underworld and Hades as a place. I loved, because a lot of times you will have retellings or anything talking about the underworld as this being like a dark place, scary, kind of like the Christian version of hell, that kind of thing, and that is not what the underworld is supposed to be. That's not what I picture the underworld as, and you have all this room for, like, just awesome world building potentially with the underworld, because, like, no one knows what it looks like, man, you know? So this was cool because it was like its own world. It had lots of different things going on in it, and it was like its own beautiful setting. It had a lot of, like, imagery connected to it. It's one of the underworlds that doesn't necessarily feel like it's underground, like in a rock. You know, it has light. It's just the same kind of light. There's a lot of, like, color. There's a lot of use of, like, stones and stuff, which is really cool, like precious gems and stones and stuff. And so it feels like it's still like the underworld, and you have, like, the shades and whatever, but there's still, like, versions of life and, you know, life kind of living on in the underworld and all this kind of stuff. So that was really cool, and I really liked that. Next, I'm going to talk about the characters. I'm going to kind of connect this with talking about, like, the general pantheon first, because it is part of the world building as well. So I liked that this was all the traditional gods, and that we got to see that. This is also, it doesn't shy away from the fact that Greek mythology is very rapey. Like, that's a thing, and I will talk about that a little more in detail in a second, but it didn't shy away from that. The characters maintain their personalities that you do have in myth. So you have Zeus and Apollo being, like, playboys slash rapists. You have Demeter being, like, a very overpowering mother. You have, like, Hecate being amazing, and, like, Nyx, and you have some of the Titans being around and, like, living up to their personalities as well. So that's cool, and I really like that, and I like that take on it. As I've said in a lot of other videos about Hades and Persephone, I like the modern retelling version of Hades and Persephone where Persephone went willingly to a point. This one kind of messes with that a little bit, but I like what this did with it. And that she was being kind of, like, suffocated by her overbearing mother. So this element was in there. So Demeter was, like, a loving mother, but also very suffocating. That was good. Talking about our protagonists, I will say too, because you do get both perspectives of Hades and Persephone, I really liked their characterizations a ton. I love, like, their character development. I like the way that they acted. They didn't act overly broody. Sometimes you'll get Hades acting overly broody or almost villainous. That wasn't the case here. He definitely grows as a character. You see kind of, like, he talks about how he used to be at the beginning and how, like, everything kind of went for him, and that's really good. and he has like a little found family. That's another thing I like about Hades and Persephone retellings, is usually Hades will have this like chthonic found family thing going on, which I really appreciate. And so all of those elements existed. And then we have Persephone as like this maiden character at the beginning, so she actually had 2 different names within the pantheon. She was also like a corn maiden, was kind of her thing, you know, like the spring goddess, but she wasn't always like Persephone, basically, before she was taken. So we have that kind of like duo dynamic thing going on with her and her progression into being Persephone. And this is really written as Persephone being a boss-ass bitch. Like, and she is like really coming into her own. She wants to be a queen. She acts like a queen. She's not really like spoiled. There are moments of like naivety that like I don't really like, but it's part of her character. So like, even though I'm annoyed by that, like I like that existed in there. And I do like their dynamic, because it isn't really, like I've said before in Hades Persephone retellings, I'm pretty okay with insta-love with them, because I'm like, well, they're fated and like they're promised and like that's why I'm reading it. So I'm kind of okay with that, but this didn't really have that. They do have an instant connection, but there's a lot of things going on between them and a lot of like distrust, and it takes a while for them to really ramp up into being like a partnership and equals. And that's the thing too, is like they're always viewing the other one as an equal. Both of them do that, and that's really awesome, because I love the Hades Persephone like partnership, and the fact that like she is really feared within Greek mythology. Like, people didn't want to even say her name, and like all of this stuff is wrapped into this. Having said that, as far as like the plot and stuff, and these things kind of all weave together with the story, so I will talk a little bit about like the plot stuff with the erotica version of this. So the erotica is overwhelming. I'm okay with sex in books, and again, maybe if I would have known, I would have been like a little better with this, but I went into it not expecting that level of sex in it, and explicit sex scenes. I thought this was going to be an adult romance, so I knew there was going to be sex scenes, but I didn't know there was going to be so many. And from the start, within the first, I think 80 pages, there were at least 3 sex scenes, and then as it went on, it wasn't just sex scenes between the main characters, it's also sex scenes between side characters that are like not important, like minor side characters. And I'm like, why do I have to read about all of this sex? And then on top of that, you have this really icky element of, like I said before, the Greek mythology pantheon, they're pretty rapey. Like, it's a thing. And so there's this like violence against women element thrown in, and there is a rape scene in here. And it didn't need to happen. Actually, there's possibly even 2. There's a rape scene, and there's a scene where a woman is had sex with willingly, and then she's murdered right after. So it's a lot of violence against women, and I don't think that that's a spoiler to say, because that's incredibly triggering to a lot of people, and I don't like that, especially wrapped up in a story that is mostly erotica. So you'll have these erotic scenes that people may or may not, depending on your preferences, be like turned on by, and then you have a scene like shortly after a woman being raped. It's just like, inexplicitly, you know? So it's like, you're throwing this in with this like sexy story. I think that the book did a good job of kind of saying that like this is wrong, but it's also really jarring to have a scene written in a similar way to like a romantic sex scene that's like a rape scene, you know? Like it wasn't, you know, as flowy and like sexy or whatever necessarily, but like it was really jarring. It made me really uncomfortable. I did not like it. I was sick of seeing violence against women so much in this story. It's weird, because I think the overall theme of the story is very much like lady empowerment. But at the same time, there's elements of violence against women. There's this element of Demeter especially being like a scorned woman. Like, she's scorned by Zeus millennia ago, and she's still bitter about it and is like destroying the world over it, kind of. And that's kind of like, really? Like, do we need to be doing this, like, women scorned, very kind of one-dimensional feeling thing? I just went a little bit more out of that. So, yeah, I found the sex scenes just very, like, a little much, and the fact that it was, like, erotic all the time, almost. Like, again, I know it says erotic story, like, whatever. Everyone has different definitions of that. But the fact that there's stuff all the time, like, there'll be a breeze, and just in a normal scene, and nipples will be discussed. I'm just like, I don't need this or want this, honestly. I'm here for the world building and the characterizations and the plot outside of this. I don't want this part. So eventually I started just skim reading the sex scenes, and I started enjoying it a lot more. I actually almost gave up about halfway through this, but I really wanted to push through because I wanted to read this as one of the, like, the crowning jewels of Hades Persephone retellings, and it's something I want to compare stuff to because a lot of people have read it. And I almost gave up, and then I started pushing through it and skimming the sex scenes, and it made it a lot more enjoyable for me. So if you go into this knowing the erotica is there, but you don't really want to read the erotica, you're just there for the characterizations and stuff, then I recommend skipping the sex scenes. It makes it way more enjoyable. So overall, I gave this book 2.5 to 3 stars. I really can't fully decide where I sit with it, but I do love the world building and characterizations and like personality so much. It like hits everything that I want. It's just the violence against women and, you know, sex stuff really brought it down for me. But if you're really into that, at least the sex stuff, hopefully you're not into the violence against women stuff, but like if you're into the really sexy times all the time, you might really enjoy this. Receiver of Many was actually my Patreon pick for May. I just didn't get to it until a little more into June. On Patreon, I have a poll every month where people get to pick the book that they wish me to read and prioritize and review that month. So if you are interested in picking a book for my TBR every month, I will leave the link for that one on the screen. I do think I will eventually read the second book. This book wraps up in a way that you could kind of maybe not need to continue. Like, there are unanswered things, but I feel like you could just kind of chill with it. But I probably will eventually finish it, and again, just skim read all the sex scenes. But comment down below and let me know what you thought of Receiver of Many, and if you have any other Hades Persephone recommendations for me, because I'm still looking for my favorite one. I thought this one might be it, but it's not. So I've read a number of them. They're just not favorites yet. It's my unicorn. I'm chasing it forever. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!